tell you who I am. I'm Jane Keon, and I'm the chair of this group. And we're glad to see a couple new faces tonight, as well as some familiar old ones. And I'm going to pass around the sign-up sheets. By signing your name, you help us fulfill our requirement to get some technical assistance grant money from EPA. So even if you're a presenter, you can sign there. Has anybody had a chance to take a look at the minutes for August? Has anybody had a chance to read them? We don't have our usual, oh, Phil, you're here. Have you read the minutes?
No, not yet.
Well,
I'm working on it.
okay. Let's do the treasurer's report, and then we'll come back to the minutes.
Oh, okay.
Where's Gary? Oh.
Right here. Okay, thank you. For the month of August, our general fund checking, we had earnings of 7 cents. That was our interest. We had expenditures of $1,505.20. And that money went towards our technical advisor, towards Ogle Computers, and our yearly renewal of our post office box. Along with the state of Michigan, they get $20 for a nonprofit fee. So I began the month with $2,672.60. I end the month with $1,167.47, and I have a bank statement that agrees with that. In our money market account, we began the month with $86,652.05. We had earnings of $18.40, leaving us with $86,670.45. And included in that amount is $786.19, which is left over from our Carter Award. And I understand we might be spending that tonight?
Nope.
Nope, okay. And our technical assistance grant is down to $9,159.01. And I believe November starts the new year, is that right, Tom? October starts the new year. And we're already kind of in the process of trying to get another grant extension, which would be $50,000. So I would like to also mention that we have t-shirts for sale. They're going fast, so if you're really thinking about it, you better get on it. They're last year's prices, $11, and membership is $5, and that allows you to vote and be heard. I think that's it, Jane.
Okay. $5 a year, not just a meeting, so it's a good deal. A couple things under correspondence and communications that are not on your agenda. Ed Lorenz has been trying to get a celebration pulled together for, is it the 100th anniversary?
50th.
It's the 50th anniversary. What is it, Tom? Do you remember? Of
It's the
Rachel
50th
Carson's book.
anniversary of Silent Spring.
Yeah, of the book Silent Spring. He tried to get the EPA administrator to come, but that didn't work out. But he now is talking to the author of Rachel Carson's biography, Linda Lear, and it looks like she may come. So we'll let you know how we're doing on that. Also, he sent a copy of the original consent decree when they did the original cleanup of the plant site back in 1980, 82, I think the consent decree was. That he sent it to Nina Mendelsohn at U of M Law School, who has helped us with other things. She's going to read it over, and I'm not real clear, and Ed can't be here because he's teaching tonight, but read it over to see if when it's the consent decree ends in 2012, what we can do. And the one thing I do know that we want to do is take out the very specific detailed information that's in there about the tombstone having to be on the plant site and the wording on the tombstone, and make it so that we don't have to have a tombstone in the middle of St. Louis, but we can have a sign of some other sort. So we'll hear more about that when Ed can be here next month. Back to the minutes. Has anybody had a chance to read them? I would entertain a motion to approve. All right. Is there a second? Marilyn. Marilyn can second. All right. So did you get that, Melissa? Yeah. So we will receive those into the record. Under old business, you have in front of you a copy of the letter that we sent to EPA about the 5-year review. And what they did is they came here on September 29th. No, August 29th. And had a wonderful poster display. And the public was allowed to come in and look at what was going on with Operating Unit 1, Operating Unit 2, and Operating Unit 3. The original project that EPA undertook here was out in the impoundment area of the river, and that was called Operating Unit 2, to just confuse you, but that's the first one they did. The Operating Unit 1 is the plant site itself, which we now have a record of decision for, and hopefully we'll have money and that can be cleaned up starting in 2014. And now, just most recently, the downstream portion of the river has been designated Operating Unit number 3 of the Velsicol Superfund site. So we saw posters on all of those, and quite a few people, a number of people came in, and we had good talks with everybody.
How far down river?
As I understand it, to the confluence with the Chippewa.
At this point.
At this point. We're going to hear a whole lot about that tonight. That's what this program is going to be about, so glad you're here, Walt. Anything else, Tom, Scott, about the 5-year review that you want to say?
It's going through Senate. I did get one other public comment from a gentleman from Alma. Your letter and the comment will be as an exhibit in the 5-year review.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, one other comment is the 5-year review process is something that will continue on this site for basically eternity. I mean, we'll be back every 5 years to evaluate anything we've done, things that we're doing. So, and sometimes people think because we select a remedy, we have a rod, we implement a remedy, that it's all done. And that's not the way it is at all.
And I believe I'm correct in saying that the plant site itself, the 5-year review for that was kind of up in the air because they haven't really started to clean that up yet.
Well, it's deemed non-protected.
Non-protective, and the river is not really off the books either because the plant site still has the potential to leak into it. So, all right. Last month we had agreed to spend some money to send Jim Heinzman to a conference in California on endocrine disruptors. And he submitted his application to go to this conference. It was wonderful. He shared it with the executive committee. But they turned him down. So we were a little surprised at that. He had a lot of qualifications, but I think they were looking most likely more for nurses and doctors that work directly with patients that have reproductive problems due to endocrine disruptors. That's what we assumed. So we're not going to be spending the money. Tom?
I know last meeting there was a discussion on maybe you guys would want to go to some kind of technology conference.
Right.
And I think I got a lead on something. It's not a Battelle one, but another one. So I'm going to get that information to you, and you guys can look at it and make a decision if you wanted to send. It's talking about various technologies and things like that. I just got a card in the mail on it. And one of the guys I know who's going to be helping us with the in-situ thermal treatment, Jim Cummings from headquarters, he's part of that too. So
Okay.
I'm going to talk to him to see if it's, I'm going to give him a call to find out. I just got the card Tuesday, I think, so, and then Monday or Tuesday. So I'll get that info to you, and you guys can kind of make a decision if you want to send somebody to something like that.
Sounds good. Tom, you want to come up front and talk to them about the DDT report from Dow?
Well, I just got some. Certainly, I'm familiar with what's going on with the Dow site, and because I know the RPM really well. And she gave me. I just got a copy of the report that Dow's done a bunch of DDT sampling up actually into the Pine River and into the Tibbawasi and all that. So I'm getting all that data scanned, and I'll get you a copy of it. It's all public documents. So then today we met with Terry. I mean, we're going to be meeting with all the residents here in the next month or so to discuss, actually the sampling and at least the 10 properties, the cleanups. Well, we just, got familiar with her property and stuff, did some measurements, and things are moving really forward on the actual design for the 10 properties. Also, we're in the process of getting a sampling plan. We'll be giving it to the state. I've not even seen it yet, but I should be getting it probably next week, and we'll give it to the state. So things are coming into play regarding the actual cleanup. We're still looking to get going this fall. Right now it's probably looking at excavating in November, which is still doable. It's not going to be a very big excavation. It's not going to take very long. The bigger excavation will, based on what the data shows, will happen next year. And we'll probably do a big media event when we get going on that and stuff. But in any case, things are moving forward. I got the money from the bankruptcy trust. Jay sent the money. So we're using that, and things are moving forward.
Excellent.
Hey Tom, originally you were going to do this in October.
Well, because the contracting is just taking a long time, we're still looking to get it done before Thanksgiving. That's the plan right now. We'd like to try to do. I want to do it better, and I'd like to do it when the weather's better. But it's just there's a lot of steps. For example, we need to sample fill. We're going to bring in new fill for just the new, we're excavating, we're bringing new fill. We've got to sample that fill. There's all procedures, a number of things we've got to get in place. Particularly going out for bid, we have to follow some certain Davis Bacon Act, all kinds of things like that. So it's just a lot of logistics, but we're still on schedule to get it done before Thanksgiving. It's going to be a week maybe of excavation, that's it. So, but things are, and the sampling will be happening concurrently, and we're hoping to get that done. We'll have a couple sampling teams out there we're planning, and so we'll see. But yeah, we're still committed, Gary. It's no ifs, ands, buts. I'd like to try to do it in October for Hills people, but it's just, there's a lot of steps we have to go through yet.
We had a session, a program on sampling back several months ago, I forget, in the summertime sometime. And there were a lot of questions raised by this group about the way the sampling was going to be done. So I have been asking Tom to give us some more input on where the thinking is on this, and he has given me a little bit more, but we're definitely going to be talking about it in detail next month.
Correct. John and Chuck are coming back up.
Yeah.
I think we're going to be meeting with, we're meeting with Scott and his people after the CAG meeting to discuss. We're trying to plan out the work associated with the plant site and how we're going to actually implement things, so we'll know more. Because I have to do contracting to Hill to do that work.
Right.
So we're meeting with Scott and his people the day after the CAG, the Thursday and Friday, to talk about that, along with talking about downstream, because I'm going to be contracting with Hill's people for additional work. So we're all, Scott and I and all our teams are all together. We're doing some planning.
But our concern is that you're going to get in there and start doing the sampling without us really understanding which methods you're going to be using. So we need to
John and Chuck
know about that before
Right.
You're actually out there doing it.
Yeah, as soon as we can get the sampling plan to you, we'll do that. John and Chuck are coming the next meeting. I mean, we can do a technical meeting if you so
And if you
desire.
can send us their report prior along with the fish data, that'd be great.
Okay.
Okay. Bob, how are we coming on the water system?
We are working to get a contract with the engineering firm. There is the meeting initially scheduled of the authority for this Friday has been canceled because we're still working on some other contracts and a design work plan to get that approved before we can actually sign a contract with the engineers. So we're working with Tom and with the MDEQ Water Bureau in making sure that we have the design work plan approved before we proceed with contracting for design. So we expect we should have the design work plan approved perhaps next month and be able to enter into agreement to get the design work underway.
Okay. So you haven't had any occasion to submit bills yet for the trust money?
No, I haven't spent any money to
Okay.
actually file a claim yet.
Okay.
So,
all right.
and really Tom and I haven't decided how that's going to work yet either. So.
That's some of the things we're in discussion with. I mean,
There's
one
a
of the
lot
issues,
going on.
Yeah.
so one of the issues also with respect to the residential cleanup too, and Bob and I are working through some issues with insurance and making sure the city is protected, particularly when work takes place in the parkways because they own those pieces
Oh,
of property.
Yeah. Right.
So Bob and I are working through, there's just a lot of details.
Oh, yeah.
We want to make sure that get done before we can really begin. So we kind of, said, Bob, I appreciate Bob being really cooperative with us.
We're both government agencies, and neither one of us work very fast.
Well, we work fast, it's just end point, right?
Right.
Cool to see two of them working together.
Yeah. One other item of business, we've talked off and on about having a new logo and then getting new t-shirts and all that. And I talked to a graphic arts student from Alma College, and she is roughing out some possible logos which we'll be able to present for you either by email or at the next meeting so that we can see if there's anything in there that we like. I asked her, I said, we've had the Blue River, the green pine tree, we're kind of tired of that, and we're moving into this phase of where actual equipment is supposedly going to be out on the plant site. Maybe we could have something that's a little harder edged, a little more techno, whatever. And so she's creative and she's going to come up with some stuff. We'll see. Is there any other just CAG business to bring up right now before we move into the program? Did you have anything, Steve?
Just to mention we found at the MSU Museum, which is related to the anniversary of the publication of Silent Spring. Next week they're having a reception in the evening, and I'm not sure which day of the week. It's maybe the 25th or 27th. I'll send that information to Jane and she can pass it on.
All right.
But they have a very nice exhibit in the old MSU Museum. Don't go to the brand new art museum. You'll see that when you come into town and wonder what it is, but that's not where the DDT thing is. It's a very nice exhibit. It's got some real interesting things, including a little bit of film on birds that have been exposed to DDT and how they react. Some old data I saw on concentrations of DDT in the brains of birds. And I guess that individual who's
She couldn't come this evening. Yeah.
might be interested in that kind of thing. And then Gordon Geyer, who was pretty heavily involved at the time in all of that, and later on became the director of extension at Michigan State and also the acting president at Michigan State University for a period of time, is going to be the featured speaker.
He was also the director of the DNR for a while.
Yes, he was.
That's
I worked
right.
for him for a short time.
Yeah. So I think that'll be an interesting evening.
Yeah.
It's a short drive, I just made it.
Yep, I think we should go down and take a field trip and go down there. Anything else?
So that's this month?
Next week.
Next week, right. So you're gonna hook us up with time, dates and stuff?
Yep.
I'm gonna email Jane and then she'll send it along.
Okay. I
All
know.
right.
We're winding down.
So I will turn it over to Scott and you can introduce and take us away. Thank you.
Okay, good evening. I'm Scott Cornelius. I'm the project manager for the Velsico Superfund for the state of Michigan, the DEQ. Tonight we're going to present our findings on the downstream, which is now called Operable Unit 3. And to do most of the presentation is Chris Douglas from Weston. He's been working with me on this site for 9 years, at least 9 years. Seems about 2001, 2000, something like that. It's been a long time. The reason that you haven't probably focused on this or anything, this data yet, is because we've been involved in investigating the plant site, investigating the residential area, working on cleaning up Breckenridge. We've had a lot of things on our plate. We've been working on a lot of things. But just like the plant site, there were a lot of people who had a lot of different opinions about what was downstream or what wasn't downstream. So we devised a plan to go down and look at what could be downstream. And from that plan, we started a phased approach, much like we did at the plant site, to really go out and get the information, bring it back into our offices, look at the data, and see what questions it presented to us. And then plan the next phase to go out and get information that would answer those questions. So as we went through this process, starting in about 2002, we actually started doing the work, and ended in 2010, we've covered from the dam, well, actually, as we get into it, there's a lot more to it, but the area of interest was from the dam down to the confluence with the Chippewa River. And we've collected a lot of different samples, which Chris is going to tell you about. And we'd like you to hold your questions till the very end if you could, because it will help us get through this. This is what we call the Reader's Digest version. There is a document for the first part of this. We're still working on the last part of this data and its document, but there's already a document that's out there for the first part of this data that you'll be seeing here tonight. We'll present both the data sets tonight, but there's only one document available right now. But at the end, we'll try to answer all your questions, and like I say, the document is available. You can go and, to your heart's content, look at where every sample was taken and what the concentrations were. And it's a very interesting study. We have not done risk assessment on this, so all we're presenting tonight is what we found. We're not making any determination of risk. We're not, telling you if it's good, bad, or indifferent at this time. We're just presenting the data. And this is the approach we took when we did the same approach we took when we did the facility or the plant site. We went out there and we sampled and we told you what we found. And then we did the risk assessment and worked with the EPA, and then we could come back and tell you if there was risk or not. So, and we're taking the same approach on this. Tonight you'll hear the Reader's Digest version of all the data we collected, and you'll see, different concentrations and how we collected it and things like that. And then we'll be working with EPA to put the risk assessment together on this site. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris, and he can explain everything we've done.
All right, thank you, Scott. Like Scott said, my name is Chris Douglas. Work for Weston Solutions. We're under contract with the state. We've been working on this project pretty much all along, as you know, some of you know. This presentation is about 18 slides long, so like Scott said, it's kind of the Reader's Digest version. There's so much information that, it would take us hours and hours to get through it all if we tried to present every detail. So we kind of boiled it down, hopefully trying to give you a good, idea of what we're looking at here and what we found. So, like you said, this is going to be a summary of the investigation activities we did on OU3, OU3 being operable Unit 3 downstream from the dam down to the confluence with the Chippewa. Okay, so this slide here kind of outlines what the different areas are. So we have the overall view here, OU1 being the former plant site, and then OU2 being the impoundment that was cleaned up, and then OU3 would be this blue part here, so that's this stretch. And then upstream in the red here, basically from M46 up to Tyler Road area would be what we deemed our reference areas. So we kind of had two separate reference areas. So one upstream of Alma and then one kind of in between Alma and St. Louis. So over here you can see the blow up plant site, impoundment, and then OU3. Okay, so the objectives for this study were to document the baseline conditions prior to the finishing the sediment cleanup at OU2, which was completed in 2006. It's also to provide a basis for post-sediment removal monitoring downstream, determine the nature and extent of downstream contamination, like how far it went, what was the extent, what were the concentrations, things like that. It was also to provide data for completion of human health and ecological risk assessments, investigation of the contaminant fate and transport, and also to provide the data needed for, or hopefully as much as possible needed for completion of the RIFS, which is a remedial investigation feasibility study, similar to what was done on the plant site. All right, so here's a kind of a summary of the site investigation activities. Like Scott said, we started this back in 2003. So the first phase was essentially 2003 to 2005. And the major activities included sediment sampling. We collected over 1,000 sediment samples, floodplain soil sampling. We sampled 5 floodplains, and we had over 450 samples there. We completed surface water sampling at 3 different locations, one upstream, one immediately below the site, and then one down towards the end of OU3. And that was conducted over a 13-month period, monthly. Then we did biota sampling. There was, many different types of biota sampled. We'll get more into that in detail later, but we collected over 400 different samples of both aquatic biota and terrestrial biota. So that included fish and birds and mink and aquatic invertebrates, things like that. We also, in that first phase, completed aerial photography of the complete study area and the upstream portions of the reference areas. So that was low-level, high-resolution aerial photography that we did in the spring before the leaves came out, so we could get a real good picture of the banks of the river and just the extent of the whole study area. And then along with that, we also completed floodplain mapping, kind of in conjunction with the aerial photography. And that was completed just for OU3, so just downstream of the site. And that included the floodplains along the river that regularly flood. So it wasn't anything like 100-year flood or anything like you'd find on, like FEMA maps or anything. But we were just trying to get an idea of what floodplains frequently flood and to what extent. And so that was the mapping phase. And then we followed that up. We followed up to 2003 to 2005 work after we got a chance to review that data with the 2010-2011 work. And that included additional sediment, floodplain, soil, and fish sampling. And then in addition, we mapped sediment deposits and sampled those deposits, and this was all downstream. Okay, here's a summary of our investigation areas. And what we did is we broke up the river, and like Scott said, we did this in phases. So we broke up the river into different segments just to make it easier to handle, because you know, we're looking at 30+ miles just from the site down to the Chippewa river miles to deal with here. So on the top, we broke this up. These are the different river sections. So we call them DS1, that's just downstream area 1, DS 1.25, 1.5, and so on. And then on the bottom, in these brown color boxes, this is where the floodplains were that we sampled, that corresponded with the certain downstream segments. So you can see from in the boxes, we just kind of listed the locations, so you can get an idea of, you know, how many sample locations where we collected samples. Now these would be cores, not actual samples. And what I mean by cores is we pounded the core sampler into the sediment, and then we retrieved that, brought it back, and we processed it. We split it up into samples depending on depth. So that's just locations, that's not actual samples. That's both for the floodplains and for the river. And like I said, we had the two reference areas, one in the upper part of the St. Louis impoundment between M46 and where Horse Creek empties into the river, and then that was R2, and then R1 was up by Tyler Road. Okay. And here's just a picture of collecting samples. So they're out pulling a sample core out of the river, getting ready to seal it up and head back to process it. And then this is what a sample core looks like. We use these plastic tubes, these Lexane tubes, and cut them open. So that's your sediment inside the sample core. Okay, the analytes of interest were pesticides, you know, mainly DDT and the other isomers, some of the other pesticides, Hendrin, Dieldrin, specialty chemicals, and these were things that were manufactured at the plant site. We included PCBs, and we also did SVOCs and metals, and then we also did some physical type parameters, grain size, and total organic carbon. Okay, so now we get into the results here. And I'm going to mainly focus on DDT since that was the most prevalent compound that we found. That's what's most persistent, one of the most persistent ones. And it was pretty widespread in the sediment samples downstream. So what we're looking at here is, this would be DS1, and this is a 5-mile, the first 5-mile segment downstream. Like I said, we broke this up into segments so that we could make it easier to work it in phases and figure out where to start and stop with our sampling plan. So what we have here is the red dots. I don't know if you can see these. There's red dots and yellow dots. So the red ones indicate that total DDT exceeded the site-specific number of 5 ppm. And that's the number that was established for the sediment cleanup in the impoundment. And so we just kind of use that as a reference here. So in DS1, there were 35 samples, not locations now, this is actual samples. So some of these cores were split up into multiple samples. So we had 35 samples that were greater than 5. DDT is detected in 87% of the samples, so 185 out of 212. And DS1.5, which is, we skipped this section and then went to this 5-mile segment here, we had 6 samples that were greater than 5 ppm total DDT. And that was detected in 96% of the samples. So we had less, you know, with higher, but more detections. So then we went down, jumped down to the next segment here, this DS175, and we had 1 sample greater than 5, and that's right there. but DDT was also detected in 83% of those samples. So then we skip this long section here, jump down to the end so we could try to get an idea. We were limited with time and other things. So you can see from the results that we had none of the samples that were greater than 5 ppm total DDT, but it was still detected in 48 out of 64 samples, so 75%. And then we also listed the maximum concentrations here. So less than 1 ppm there, we're at 8.7 there, 92, and then 1600 way up here towards the dam. So you can see it really drops in concentration farther you go downriver. There were additional site-related contaminants and other contaminants detected in these samples, but DDT was the main compound that was the most prevalent and at the highest concentrations. And then, well, back up a second. We don't have the reference area stuff on here, but I'll just say something about that real quick. In R1, that's the farthest upstream reference area, we did have a few low-level detections of a few compounds, I think mostly DDT and a couple of other things, but at very, very low concentrations, basically what we would consider background. You know, that's stuff that would get in there from, you know, agriculture or, you know, wherever people use them in their homes and stuff. And then that was R1, and then in R2, which was up here, that also had, you know, fairly low levels of DDT and other site-related contaminants, but it did have very high levels of what we call PAHs, or like petroleum-related compounds. And, you know, that's, we pretty much think that's from other upstream sources. Okay, next slide. All right, so this is the floodplain results here. So starting down here with this area, this is floodplain 1, so this is the closest one. It's right across from the school there on the other side of the river. So this was FP1 or floodplain 1. So we had 38 samples that exceeded 5 ppm total DDT, and you can see that by all the red dots here. The yellow ones were below that. So he detected in 96% of the samples there. So then moving downstream to this location here, floodplain 2, we didn't have any samples that exceeded the 5 ppm. But we did detect DDT in 89% of the samples. So the maximum concentration there was 2.4 ppm, where down here it was up around 90, or over 90. So that's floodplain 2. Then we jump down to floodplain 4, which is right here. Again, no exceedances of the 5 ppm total DDT, but we did have it in 89% of the samples, and at maximum, the maximum concentration there was 2.2, so real similar here to floodplain 2. And then sliding all the way down here to the end, we got floodplain 5. Again, we didn't have any exceedances of 5 ppm total DDT. Maximum concentration was 1.3, and we had it at 67% of the samples. So we go from 96% to 89, 89, down to 67. So again, similar to the sediment in the river, decreasing concentrations the farther you go downstream. So floodplain 1 had the highest levels, and floodplain 5 had the lowest. And we did sample a floodplain up in the reference area up near Tyler Road there. And again, like the sediment samples, we had a few low-level detections in just a couple of samples, basically what we would consider background concentrations. Okay. So now we get to the surface water. Like I said, there was 3 locations. So we had surface water location 1 up here in the reference area at Tyler Road, 2 right here below the dam, and then 3 down by by the Chippewa River there. And basically the results that we got from the surface water samples was 5 of the 13 samples from SW2 had detections of DDT in there. Maximum concentration was 0.029 parts per billion. So very, very, very low. You know, for example, the Part 201 drinking water criteria for DDT ranges from 3.6 ppb to 9 parts per billion. So we're, this would be much lower than that. And then the other 2 locations, in the reference area, we didn't detect any DDT or really anything else in the surface water there, except for some metals that occur naturally. And then down here in SW3, we had 1 sample where we detected DDT, and it was even less than the concentration here. So I guess the takeaway from that is surface water is, it's not a real, it's tricky. I mean, it's not real reliable unless you have super high concentrations coming from something that's a pretty big river, got a lot of volume of water. We did it anyway, just to get an idea, see what was there, and didn't really find much in the surface water. Okay. So I'm going to move on to the biota here. This is just a picture, a slide showing some different types of biota we sampled. You got your mink here, muskrat. We did worms, birds, robins, shrews, crayfish, fish, aquatic invertebrates, mice.
How big was that carp?
That's a big carp.
27 pounds. That came out of the almond impoundment. Yeah, that was a beast. Okay, next one. All right, so these are the biota sampling areas. We did sampling up here in the reference area, so both in the floodplain, that was called floodplain 3, and then in reference area 1. So you can see here, like in the floodplain, we did mice, shrews, earthworms, plants, in addition to the soil. And then in the river, we did fish, which was carp, smallmouth bass, suckers, and forage fish, which was shiners, minnows. And then we did birds and eggs, mink and muskrat, and then benthic mackerel invertebrates. And then in R2, we did fish, same species, and then floodplain 1 down below the dam, we did the mice, shrews, earthworms, and plants again. And then in DS1, also right here, below the dam, we did the fish, same fish, birds, eggs, mink, muskrat that we did up here. And then down in DS2, we just did fish and the mackerel invertebrates, which I think just consisted of crayfish down there. Yeah. So basically what we found was, the biota downstream of the site, most of it, well, I guess all of it, had DDT in it to some level or another. And some of the different species had various levels of other things in it, some higher, some lower, depending on the animal. But really, I guess the takeaway from it was that everything downstream from the site had detectable levels of DDT in it, and that included the birds, the mink, the muskrat, the benthic mackerel invertebrates, fish, everything. So up here in the reference area, very low levels, pretty much non-existent. And again, it correlated pretty well with what we found in the floodplains and in the sediments up there, and it was basically what we would consider background concentrations. There were a few things that we found up there, but there was a real distinct difference, between the reference area and then all the downstream stuff. So the results of the biota sampling are being used in the ecological risk assessment. and some of it's going to be used in the human health risk assessment. That was really the main reason we collected all that data. Go to the next slide. Okay, so we just put together one graph here for the fish because this was the most pronounced and had probably the most interesting data. So what we have here is, in this box, we got the St. Louis impoundment fish. So it's broken up. There's 3 years of carp, 3 years of bass, and then 2 years of sucker here. And this is for all the samples that we collected. Well, the 1997 data was the state of Michigan had collected, but so this is the mean total DDT 32.4 for all those carp from 97. So that puts it up here. Then we go to 2004, which was the first round of fish we collected as part of this OU3 investigation. You can see it dropped down to 6.21. And then in 2010, it's dropped down to here to 0.28 for the mean total DDT and carp. And you can see kind of a similar trend here with the bass and even with the sucker. And then, so that's the St. Louis impoundment. Then we go over here, DS1. This is that first area below the dam. Again, we got the carp here, 3 years of carp. There's 2 years of bass and 2 years of sucker. And actually real similar, not quite as much of a drop as the impoundment, but you can see the carp dropped here down to 2010 levels. Same thing with the bass and the sucker. And then downstream at DS2, we just have the 2004 data. We didn't sample 2010. Just didn't have time. This red line right here is at 5 ppm, and basically, just what we're told is that's what the kind of the number that the Department of Community Health uses kind of as their benchmark. So we just, that sounds like it's going to change, but we just put that in there so you can kind of get an idea of where things are at in comparison to what the fish advisory says.
Can you explain that a little more in terms of what that means, the benchmark?
If the fish have DDT levels of 5 or greater in them, you want?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
If community health looks at a number of fish on a 5-year basis of all the lakes and streams in Michigan, and what they find is if one fish exceeds this level, and this is your DDT level for human consumption, and of course they've got a number of different levels based on different people, sensitive groups, they call them, which would be your elderly and your children, and also your subsistence fishermen. So, but below this, and I believe this is just the regular, across the board kind of human population number for 5. But what we were really trying to show with this is that we're looking at trends, we're not looking at individual fish. And the community health department would look at the individual fish and would see if anything that they collected was over that number. But what we're seeing is encouraging. It's telling us that, and especially up here in the impoundment, we're seeing a decrease in all of our fish levels. And we attribute that, of course, to the sediment, the amount of sediment that was taken out. We took out a huge amount of DDT and sediments out of that area, so that's looking very good. We also see it down in the other part where we haven't done any remediation yet, but we believe that this actually affected that. This was your source, it's not there anymore, it can't send things downstream. So we've accomplished 2 different cleanups. By cleaning up one area, we've affected the downstream. So that's what that is, and it's more of a trend analysis because it goes across the years rather than a species analysis. I guess community health would look at it a little bit different because they need to be conservative, but even if they looked at our 2010 data, based on those numbers, there are no fish that we collected that are over their thing, right?
Well, this
I
is the
mean,
mean. We
it's
didn't
the
put the
mean, so-
maximums in there, but I believe
Yeah, for
we didn't have any
2.28.
maximums higher than that,
Yeah.
did we? I don't think we did.
Yeah, but they look at it a little bit differently. So this is an overall mean of overtime, so.
And then the fish advisory is based on the community health.
Yeah, community
Data.
health sets the fish advisories for us. DEQ and DNR cooperate in the collection of them, and then they set the actual health standards. That is online, I guess, where they get that.
Does that help, Tom?
That's great.
Yeah, okay. All right, so getting close to wrapping this up here, we'll go through our significant conclusions here, our main conclusions. Number one, significant in-stream sediment and floodplain soil contamination is present downstream from the Belsco site. DS1 and floodplain 1 were the most impacted. Like I said earlier, the farther you go downstream, the more the concentrations drop. Many of the chemicals that we detected that are present downstream can be linked to historic releases from the Belsco site, such as DDT, PBB, HBB, TRIS. These are all things we know they manufactured there. That's in addition to the other things we found that may not be related to the site, such as the petroleum-related compounds, the PAHs, and even the PCBs. We did find some PCBs, not a lot, but they're there, and there were some of the fish too. So I guess what I mean by when I say significant is, we had exceedances of the site-specific number of 5 ppm total DDT that was set for the cleanup of the impoundment. So if you remember from the other slide there with the red dots, we had quite a few in that first section and so on. The downstream extent of the sediment contamination greater than 5 ppm appears to be defined within DS175. So that was kind of that just beyond the middle. It wasn't the middle of the section going downstream, that was 1.5, so DS175 would be the next section, but we only sampled about the first third of it, and kind of in the middle of that was where we had the last exceedance of 5 ppm. And of course we know farther downstream in DS2 we didn't have any exceedances. So somewhere in between there, if not right where we found it, somewhere close, it's going to drop off to below that number.
So are you saying somewhere between the dam and the influence, or you're saying in the smaller portion of the river?
Well, I guess both technically,
Okay.
but yeah, somewhere between between the dam and the confluence with the
So
Chippewa.
essentially midway is where it drops off from being
A
greater
little
than-
further than
A
Midway,
little
yes.
further than, okay.
Yeah. So we figured that's about 33 river miles, so a little farther than halfway, maybe 12, 13 miles, 14, somewhere in there, maybe a little farther than that. Okay, go to the next slide. Okay, so the sediment data indicates that the contaminants are more prevalent in the soft sediment deposits versus the coarser sediments. And I didn't get into all that, but basically what that means is we did 2 different types of sampling out there. We did the first back in 03, 04, we set up what we called transects, and this was our systematic, unbiased sampling method, okay? So these transects were set up, every quarter mile, and it was all systematic sampling. And then when we went back in 2010, 2011, we identified these soft sediment deposits that a lot of them were missed the first time through with the systematic sampling. And we knew that, so we wanted to go back and target those soft sediment deposits to see, was there more contamination hung up in those soft sediments, and yes, our results show that. And we kind of suspected that all along. So that's why we ended up mapping the bigger soft sediment deposits. We didn't map all of them, but we're trying to get an idea of what we were dealing with out there. So we set a size limit on it and mapped bigger ones. Another conclusion here was that you know, contaminant concentrations for all compounds in all the areas downstream decrease with distance from the site, downstream from the site. I said that before, but that's one of our major conclusions. By the time you get down to DS2, you know, the concentrations just really drop off. Okay. The surface water data indicates that contaminants are not present, or were not present at high concentrations in the water at the time. And those, you got to remember that those samples were collected between 2003 and 2004, basically for 13 months. And so we got all different seasons of the year. We collected surface water samples when the dredging was going on. When they were putting the sheet piling in, taking it out. So even with, you know, whatever might have been stirred up, you know, we still really didn't see much in there. So that was our major finding there with surface water. The conclusions for the biota data, it indicates, you know, that, like I said, all the downstream samples exhibited, you know, levels of site-related compounds that appear to be bioaccumulating in there of one type or another. DDT was the one compound we did find present in pretty much every sample, every biota sample downstream. Okay, so the last one. And so I guess the final conclusion here is that the historic fish data, the pre-sediment cleanup data compared to the 2010 fish data, which is post-sediment cleanup, that indicates that contaminant concentrations have decreased significantly in the impoundment fish and the downstream area 1 fish, like Scott was explaining there. I think that's it. Can I answer any questions you got?
Yeah. Want to wrap it up. So what this told us is that, well, it gave us a couple of pieces of information that we really needed to go any further with this project. One is we had a baseline. We knew exactly where we started from. And then we have because these are snapshots in time, you know, as you go out and take something, it's only for that time period. But we had a baseline snapshot, and then we went on and took a more detailed snapshot of after the remediation was done. And it showed that the remediation is tremendously effective. We drove those fish levels down faster than we thought they would. We found that not only were the surface water levels low, but even during the time when we were excavating and putting in sheet piling, that Hill had done an excellent job in controlling their off-site sediment moving downstream. So that was encouraging, you know. And when you see things like that, you really have to applaud the people who worked on that, because that is hard. When you're messing around in the water, everything wants to move downstream on you. So that was, you know, they did an excellent job. We have results not only in the impoundment, but decreases downstream. We couldn't have asked for better. So I guess this is, you know, this is what you guys have been waiting for, to see this kind of information saying this remediation worked and it worked well. And it will only get better from here. I mean, we've taken out the source, and once you take away the source, and that's what we're trying to do, or will do at the plant site, we're going to destroy the source and remove it, you'll get the same kind of effect. You won't have things going out, you won't have it going in the groundwater, you won't have it going into the stream, and that's exactly the same rationale and approach we're going to take on the plant site. So with that, I'd like to open it up. Questions?
I mean, the fish are safe to eat now?
We didn't say that.
Close.
You still have to follow the community health advisories.
All right.
Eventually, we're hoping that it gets to that point, but they have to do their sampling, and they have to make that determination. We don't make that determination. And also, you have to remember, if there's old carp out here, they're still going to have the high concentrations in them. But once they die off, and the new generation comes and replaces them completely, that's what we're hoping for, is that there's no more source, they can't absorb it, we'll get to the point where they're edible.
What hole's that 2,700?
Oh, jeez. You know, we didn't age
We didn't
them.
age them.
But, you know, but you could take the scales off them and age them. They're like
Right.
tree rings, you know,
Right.
on a tree. We don't know how old it was. That wasn't part of our.
Okay, my question ties into the age factor about the biota sampling. Over what period of time did that sampling take place?
For which samples?
Well, the ones that you showed up there, you showed that, you said you found DDT in practically all the different organisms that you had little pictures of up there.
Right, that was basically over 2 years, I mean, and it was pretty much just one set of samples. This has
Okay.
not been a repetitive thing except for the fish.
And what, 2 years, was that the 10-11 sampling?
No, that was 2003, 2004.
That was our baseline data.
Right.
If we were to, now, after everything's, you know, said and done here, somebody might want to go back and do another round of that kind of sampling, and they would have something to compare it to. And that's what's so important about your baseline, is if you don't have that to compare to, you can't tell how well your remediation has performed.
Right. Did you do any age determinations on any of those organisms?
No.
Or figure, okay, so you don't know how long someone could have been there to accumulate?
Right. I mean,
Except
you know,
you know what the age is, various average age a bird lives, a lot of them is just 2 or 3 years.
Sure.
But,
sure.
okay,
Yeah.
did you, I didn't notice any mollusks being sampled. I live on the river and there's a lot of
We did
mollusks.
collect, yes, we did do some freshwater mussels, clams, both.
Okay.
More for identification.
Well, we did submit them. We did submit them for analysis, and I believe, I'm just quoting this off the top of my head, I think the DS1, immediately downstream of the dam, that sample batch, I think they had PAHs in them, and maybe some metals, and that was it. And the other ones from the reference area and farther downstream really didn't have anything.
One other thing that we did is, because in Michigan, we have a few mussels that are endangered and stuff like that. We had a mussel expert come in and go downstream with us and ID the mussels and everything. So we were sure that, you know, we identified any endangered or threatened species.
You got any data on that? 'Cause I'd like to just know what's in there, what
Yeah.
you found. Yeah.
It's in the baseline assessment report,
Yeah.
which is either at the library or sent you
I have a few
copies to.
copies.
Yeah, Jane's got some copies up here that we sent. It's all in there.
Okay.
So it's available.
Well, as the river flows, won't it just kind of flush itself, kind of like flushing the toilet and clean itself?
Well, see, I think, well, I hate to get into,
Why did you look at that?
I hate to,
Okay, we're
hate
gonna
to
look
get
at
into
that
the
in the
toilet
FS, okay?
scenarios, but, you know, if there's a source, it can't,
Right.
because it always takes a little bit. In DDT and a lot of other the bioaccumulative chemicals, a little bit goes a long way.
And they stick
So-
around. They
And it
stick
sticks around, it doesn't decay,
It's
especially if it
real
isn't in the sunlight. But now that we've taken out the source, you're right, some of it is dilution. Some of it is moving downstream, and that's, you know, that's what we're seeing is,
Well, the solution is dilution.
well, no, it's not. Because you'll never dilute the source, so that doesn't work.
All right.
But after you remove the source, it
The
does,
solution is dilution.
well, it's a partial situation. We call that natural attenuation.
Right. That's why I want the lake there.
But the lake wouldn't matter if the source is still there.
No, once you remove the source.
Oh, I see.
You know, you wouldn't have a lake if you didn't remove the source.
Oh, well, I don't think the lake's coming anytime soon.
We're talking Lake St. Louis, is that what we're talking
Well,
about?
he wants to increase, he wants the plant
Gotcha.
site to become the
Yeah.
lake.
So was any of this based on caged fish studies, or is this all just the fish in the biota that's just hanging out?
None of the data we presented here was cage fish data. There is cage fish data, but we didn't talk about that here. So the stuff that we collected was all what's there naturally, wild, you know, lives there all the time.
You have to remember, in cage fish studies, their main purpose is to tell you yes or no. Either you have a bioaccumulative in your water that the fish are absorbing, or you don't. And what we find is they're short-term studies, they're 28 days. And usually the bioaccumulation rate is increasing still when those fish are taken out and sampled. So those studies are more for telling you yes or no, you have a problem or you have a bioaccumulation situation going on. But this is the stuff that these kind of fish collections are the ones that tell you what's actually going on with the native populations.
So the sampling process here does not include a composite kind of strategy. This is a one-on-one kind of thing.
Right.
You're not blending, and you're grinding the whole fish up, or you're just doing?
No, we followed what the community health recommends, which is a certain procedure depending on the type of fish, but it's basically fillets. And it's either fillets with skin on or skin off.
Right. So it's human
Depending
consumption.
on the species of fish, right?
It's a human consumption type analysis.
So ecologically speaking, then it could be something entirely different.
Well, that's why we sampled forage fish. So I take that back. The shiners that we collected, those were ground up whole.
Yeah.
So the bass, carp, and suckers were filleted, but the forage fish were ground up whole, you know, for use in like the ecological risk assessment and food web model.
Right. We try to evaluate that. We serve two groups when we do risk assessment. We have the human health people and the ecological people, and they need different data. So that's why we chose different species of fish, and you prepare them differently.
And you said something about when you took your core samples, those were locations on your map, and then within that core sample you created many more samples out of that?
Yep.
So when you presented your data, you talked about how many hits you had that were above or where they fell. So you could essentially have how many samples out of a core sample.
Depending on how long it was, how far we could drive.
So you could have, 10 of those little samples were high hits out of that one core sample.
That's true.
Am I understanding that
Yes.
correctly?
Yes.
So that would limit the amount of area that is contaminated.
No, because the way we look at it is in the report, we split it out into the depth, the sections, where we cut them up and we compare what the depths are. So we could know how, if we were going to go out there and remediate, which this is meant to support, we would know how deep you have to dig. Kind of like we did in the, out here in the residence. We took core samples, or we took samples down until we got to the point where we didn't have any contamination, and we could tell which sections, how far down needed to be remediated.
Well, you also mentioned later on about soft sediment versus coarse sediment.
Right.
So it tells me that you have a feeling for the soft sediment.
We do.
So that's a certain level. And so are you also telling us now then that the high hits came in that layer and all these sample locations?
Which layer?
Soft sediment.
Well, the soft sediments were actually areas. When we started this, we set up transects at an equal distance just to get some coverage across the site. And as we went up there, we noted wherever there was a soft sediment or deposit area where a deposition would leave soft sediments, we would note that. We came back and did those specifically to find out how the soft sediments differed from just the regular hard sediments. So we do have that information too, which will be, again, good for a feasibility study.
So the sediments that we're talking about are submerged. They're not in the flood.
Yeah, if it's sediment, it's submerged. Floodplain soils are above the water.
So this is like places where it's settled out as it's coming down the stream?
Right, when,
where you have a bend or something,
Yeah.
or you have like a deposit of the softer, finer, more organic sediments as opposed to the middle, you know how that river is, it's real rocky and gravelly. I mean, those areas where we sampled, sometimes we couldn't even get a sample because you'd pound that core and it just wouldn't go anywhere. So, in answer to your question, we found, it seemed like, we found higher concentrations of contamination in those soft sediment deposits, but we also found some contamination in the coarser sediments as well. But it's just that there was more of it, I guess, in the soft sediments.
And what you find is,
which is what we suspected.
In a riverine situation where you have depositional areas and high erosion areas, you get the settling of the soft stuff. The soft stuff has a lot more organic material, a lot of these compounds like to attach to the organic material. Therefore, you suspect that they would be there. And that's exactly why we took the time to go back in and, well, first do the transects and then go back in and attack and map. We've got a whole map of where these places are, the soft sediments. That's exactly why we did that.
And you also said something about you're not sure if it's going to stay at 5 ppm.
That's the fish consumption advisory level. We were talking with the people who run that program, and they had indicated that they have done a review of information on compounds, not necessarily DDT, but DDT included, and they may be making some recommendations to change those levels. They would not share with us if they're going up or down. We don't know.
For the whole state.
For the whole state,
yeah,
for
just for the
everybody.
whole program,
Yeah.
not specifically this.
Yeah, right. And they wouldn't share with us what was actually going on, and we didn't really want to know that much about it.
So as that changes, so changes your guys's.
Well,
You got to comply with whatever's going on.
yeah. Well, not the cleanup level. The cleanup level of 5 is based on
The sediment.
for the sediment is based on the ecological risk, and that will stay most likely the same, even if the community health department decided to lower the amount that a human should eat in fish.
Why? Okay, but I thought when you in your presentation, one of you guys made reference to human levels at 5 ppm.
Right, that's the fish. Right now, for DDT, the consumption advisory says at 5 parts per million, if your fish is 5 parts per million, you shouldn't eat that fish for DDT. And that's the level they're set. We're saying that they may change that level, and we don't know which way it's going, but it's been my experience that it goes down rather than up most of the time as new information becomes available. But that's not going to necessarily affect a sediment cleanup number or a soil cleanup number, because that is based on the amount available for the biota to become contaminated. So it's 2 different numbers, and I'm sorry they were both 5, because that is confusing.
Right.
But you're right.
So that does clear that, because I was
Okay.
confused.
Yeah.
And then you also talked about, you talked about DDT primarily, and I get that. But you just many times made reference to and to other things.
Right.
And to other things.
Yeah.
So these other things,
Yeah.
both upstream,
Yeah.
in the R2 area,
Right.
wherever.
Yeah.
So what's up with that? Is any
Okay.
of that stuff, where are we at with that?
Okay. It's all documented in our report, but because we would be here for weeks explaining and showing you different graphs and stuff like that.
Okay.
It's all in our report, and it's all been documented, what we found. And one of the reasons we did the R2 is because we knew the petroleum industry was upstream, and there had been a lot of releases that had come downstream. With the R2 stuff, we can look in there and say, this is before our site, before our discharges at Velsico, upstream, and we can compare it to what's downstream, and we can match that stuff up. So that will give us a nice characterization of what may have come from the industries up there.
Right.
Now we have 150 chemicals that we analyzed for, and everything we found is in those reports.
And I realize you can't go through all of that, but
Right.
is any of that other stuff besides DDT going to drive a cleanup?
You know,
Possibly.
we
don't know yet.
It could, but it would, right now we'll look at that when we look at risk, whether there's a risk to it being there, if it will drive the cleanup or not. But in most cases, if you had a commingled situation where DDT was above a criteria, we'd be, addressing the DDT and whatever else is there all at the same time. So we probably won't have, I mean, there could be a situation where it was Total Petroleum had discharged methyl ethyl chicken wire and it's downstream at a high concentration beyond where DDT is. That would be a situation where we'd have to work with other people in the DEQ, like Eric Van Riper and stuff, to have them help us do that cleanup. We would provide that information to them and let them attack it from a state point of view, because it's not a chemical of concern for us at the Superfund site. If it's commingled though, then Tom has the job, EPA has the job of, you know, evaluating that and talking with who's ever responsible for it, because we can't separate it out, we can't clean out one without the other, and working through that enforcement issue.
So risk assessment is next. Is that what
Risk
you're-
assessment is, yep. That's the next time you see us talking about this, we'll probably be talking to you about risk assessment.
Who decided on that number 5 and how did they decide?
Oh, you know, that's a long story, way, way back.
Well, did they use a dartboard?
No. It's all based on very scientific studies on animals exposed to DDT. And we've continued to work on that number. We've reviewed that number. Matter of fact, I had my toxicologist and Jim Chapman, who has been here and talked to you before, work on that and really fine-tune that number to see if 5 was low enough. That was our question. And they looked at different studies, new studies. They looked at how the animals were exposed. Because in a lot of cases, when you have something like DDT and eagles, you talk about eggshell thinning. But that's not the problem with robins. Robins just drop dead. It's not eggshell thinning. So they went back in the literature and got new data and new studies that actually looked at, you know, birds like robins and stuff, and they pull all that together. So it's not based on eggshells. It's actually based on the death of the robin itself or the birds. So that's our endpoint, is death, not eggshell thinning. And I think that was a big improvement, and that's how they came up with the number 5.
It seems to me like there'd be certain situations where number 5 would be too low and then other situations where it'd be too high.
Well,
I can't see how it would cover everything just with one number.
You know, I guess it's in toxicology. You know, you have a number of different factors that you look at, and like route of exposure, and robins usually are getting it through eating worms and things like that. So you model that. You model how much the worms are, how much the robins get, and things like that. And it's a model, and we come up with the best number. We're usually overly conservative in our estimates. Our risk assessment is overly conservative because we would rather protect too much than not enough. So we become overly conservative with our risk assessments. And that guarantees that we don't have the problem of not protecting to an adequate level.
I was just curious how long this group will have to wait before we get the data on the human risk assessment. Are we talking months or longer, or
we've got
2 months or long?
It'll probably be 4 or 5 months at least before we have that. We have, you know, we've got a lot of discussions that we're having with EPA right now about the data and everything, and we've got an approach that we're going to be presenting to them about how to approach all this data and how to work through it, but we still have to have that discussion with them. So it could be 5, 6 months before we see that.
Were you looking for PAHs?
Well, we sampled for PAHs.
Yes.
Yeah, because they're one of the petroleum type compounds that we'd expect to find.
Did you try to find other petroleum compounds or chemicals like benzene?
With our 150 chemicals, we screen for just about everything.
Okay.
And so we do a pretty good job screening for all that stuff.
And the PAHs were above exceedance levels? Exceeded the levels?
We'd have to go back and look at that. I'm not.
Depends on where you're talking. If
Yeah.
it was in the upper end of the St. Louis impoundment, the R2 area, we had exceedances of what they call like ecological screening levels. The state of Michigan really doesn't have criteria for sediment, but there's a EPA Region 5 screening level
Which we
criteria, and there were some exceedances of those numbers.
Yeah. You got to remember that PAHs is a huge category of compounds.
Right.
And so we look at each individual compound rather than a thing called PAHs. So, and they're all in the, you know, in the documents. They're all
Can you tell us what PAH stands for?
polyaromatic hydrocarbon. That's polycyclic hydrocarbon. It's
Polycyclic aromatic
aromatic
hydrocarbon.
hydrocarbon. Yeah.
Always helps to have a chemist.
Yeah, it does.
What I was wondering is this petroleum products that you find them, you know, suspect it's a refinery, but did you find anything up further upriver than the refinery? Or it could be another source besides that?
Well, we weren't actually in the business of looking for other sources. We have enough to source ourselves. So we went beyond where. I know. And Eric Van Ryck was working on that all the time. We went above and beyond, you know, upriver where we were hopefully, you know, knew there weren't any other sources.
You sure?
Well, it appears so because we didn't detect anything up there above, you know, that was significant. So yeah. Tom?
Did that 2010 fish data, was that taken during the fishing derby? I know the state came and...
Some of it was, yeah.
Some of it we collected and some of it we got from
So
them.
that's data that people gave you guys when they were,
Right.
a couple years ago at the fishing derby?
Right.
Okay, good.
We had the people come out here and they were on site and they went and got the fish that they needed from the people who cooperated at the fishing derby. Other stuff we had to collect because of the, because we were outside the fishing derby boundaries in some cases. So we had to go, you know, that was us to, and we have a neat machine called an electroshocker, which is kind of cheating, but.
You wouldn't get credit at the fishing derby.
No. We were disqualified. Joe disqualified us, you know. Right away.
You know how they got the 27 pounds.
Yeah. That was way outside the boundaries.
So we're not concerning ourselves with non-point source issues?
I wouldn't say we're not concerning ourselves with them, but as far as Superfund goes, we're looking at our sources and we're going to clean up what came from the Velsico site. Now we have a whole non-point source program in surface water and they're very concerned about it, and any data that we get we share with them so that they can do their work too. I mean, this data is going far and wide. You know, everybody likes to see free data, as I call it, and we collected it, and we want everybody to use it because that makes it more valuable.
So
and we get more
the
bang.
PAH stuff is going far and wide?
Yep. It's going to a desk near Van Riper as we speak.
Well, just to add a little bit, the new administrator for the, I want to say soil, but it's just the conservation district. She is entering into a big plan to map the whole watershed of the Pine River and is very interested in the non-source point data.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who are interested because, you know, as we build more parking lots and things like that, we create more areas where gas and oils drip and they run in the stormwater out to your, you know, rivers and stuff. So, and not only that, of course, runoff from fields and things like that. I mean, it's all part of the overall protection of the watershed.
The surface water samples, do you remove the suspended
filter
particles?
Do we
or
filter
to
them?
what level do you, how far down do you fill them?
We did both total, well, for metals anyway, we filtered. We didn't filter for everything else because we wanted to know if the particulates had anything to do with it. So we did both total and dissolved metals on the samples, but everything else was not filtered.
We try to get both sides of that picture. We've done a pretty comprehensive job.
Actually, I take that back. I take that back. I just remembered. We did do 1 or 2 sets of samples, I think, where we filtered everything, or am I just thinking on the metals?
Just the metals.
It was just the metals. Okay, so we did most of them totals, but we did a few sets of samples for dissolved, so we filtered. But that's right. Okay, the other compounds was unfiltered. Right. This was a few years ago.
It's been a pretty comprehensive, long-term study, and like I say, this is the Reader's Digest version. All the details are in that document and one soon to come out that we're working on right now.
Do you have it on a website too?
No, we don't have it on a website. We don't, the DEQ doesn't really have websites that we put site material on like that.
But it will go on the EPA one
Yep.
once? This data, raw
Yeah,
data?
I'm gonna put the report.
Yeah.
I mean, this report, and then there's a bunch of attachments to it.
Right,
That'll go on, yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
super.
And once again, you know, Weston did a great job for us. We're
Yes.
really happy with the quality of the report and the information in it and all the planning and work that went into it. So, and I think it showed a lot of positive things for this site. You know, it's rare that we can, you know, come at this short a time after remediation and say we can actually see substantial changes in fish concentrations, sediments downstream, water quality, things like that. I mean, this is I think this is really the kind of reports that we should do more of, but with limited funding, sometimes we are not available to do that or can't do that. So, and I can't say enough about, you know, EPA and Hills remediation. It was great. Obviously, you guys got a great remediation. So.
And Scott, we commend you too for having the foresight to do this study when you did early on. Yeah.
Well, since the surface water is kind of like getting a pretty good grade here,
Yeah.
I can go swimming tomorrow, maybe?
Well, you can always go swimming.
I mean, seriously.
Yeah, seriously.
Without, as it relates to any exposures to anything harmful.
Just don't touch the sediment.
What's that?
You just can't stand on the bottom.
No, you can even, you can even stand on the bottom. You know, water quality. You know, this is full body contact recreation and non-body contact like canoeing and stuff is fine. The only thing we'd suggest is that you be careful in rivers. Rivers sometimes are treacherous because of flows and other stuff that people have put in are hazardous sometimes, shopping carts, you know, tires, things like that.
Clamshells.
But yeah, you know, the community health people would not have any problem with you going swimming in this river. You know, from a chemical contamination point of view. You know, that's their analysis.
Watch out for those E. coli.
Yeah. Well, see, that's something else. That's something that we didn't check either, was E. coli. It's not a chemical contamination, so we don't check that.
Were dioxins included as an analyte?
We did a few samples throughout the whole, you know, project study. I'm talking the plant site, everything, you know, water, soil, over in the burn area, everything, and we did not find a lot of dioxins. We just didn't.
Yeah.
So we didn't include it because those are expensive to do. We did not include it in a lot of our downriver sample.
Yeah. It's a sensitive issue because of the Dow situation downstream. Even Dow came up, took samples up here to see if they could, you know, point the finger at somebody else, and they couldn't find dioxins that they could point the finger at. So we felt pretty good about that. So we didn't spend a lot of time or effort and money on the particular item. I guess that's it then.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you.
Just call your attention to the announcements at the bottom of the agenda. We will hear the sampling program next time. We are going to meet in November 1 week early because of the Thanksgiving week and deer hunting. And then when we get back after the New Year, we'll hear about the burn pit site. Yes?
Do we know if Gigi's gonna come next month or not?
The only issue with that is that she's usually coming in October and November, and I can get her to come. The problem is I'm going to be here that whole week, and so I can't bring her, you know, and so I think she's a little bit scared coming by herself, to be honest with you. But if you really want her to come next month and you need her to come next month, I'll go get her here. Okay, but she's kind of, because I said, I can't travel with her in that period, and Chuck and John are coming next month, and they can't either. So she's got to come by herself, and so I think she's